Hello, I'm Colleen Shogan, the Archivist of the United States. I'm excited to be with you here today to launch Inside the Vault, a new program series from the National Archives. This fully virtual program is bringing the National Archives to you as we discuss how history and popular culture intersect. Join us each month as we dive into our vault, examine our records with authors, historians, and other eyewitness accounts. We're kicking off the series by discussing one of my favorite subjects, national treasure. Most people know and love the archives due to the role in the movie, and tonight we'll find out what's fact and what's fiction. Be sure to stay tuned for the end of the episode when we'll take questions from you, our virtual viewers. Joining me tonight are two national treasure experts, Emily Black and Aubrey Paris. They are hosts of the National Treasure Hunt podcast and co-authors of the book, National Treasure Hunt, One Step Short of Crazy. Welcome, Emily and Aubrey, to Inside the Vault. We're excited that you're our inaugural episode guests this evening.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having us. We are thrilled to be here. What an honor.
Yes, thank you so much. This is so exciting.
So just a reminder, after we have a discussion, we will be taking questions from our viewers out there. So be thinking of some very good questions for Emily, Aubrey, and myself. So first, I want to ask you, where did you first see the movie and what sparked your interest in it?
Oh, it's a tough question because it is so long ago at this point, right? So the first National Treasure movie came out way back in 2004, and I have a distinct memory of first seeing it with my parents on Christmas Day. We had a tradition of going to the movies, and my mom really loved history. My dad was just kind of along for the ride, and I was here for a good adventure. I think you also saw it pretty soon after it came out.
Oh yes, I was in the theater right away with a friend at the time, and I think my dad was along with me. I didn't really have any particular interest in history when I started watching the film, but by the time it was done, I was definitely hooked.
Awesome. So your initial reaction was that you instantly loved it, or was it something that kind of developed over time?
I mean, I certainly instantly loved it. Aubrey, I think you also instantly
Yeah,
loved it.
there's not much not to like in my humble opinion, right? Unbiased opinion. But I think it was one of those movies that the more you saw it and at different points in your life when you saw it, it just grows on you more and more. I mean, Emily, you and I bonded over the fact that we both ended up watching it in school. It was like a classic end of the school year movie where we grew up, and then, the origin story for National Treasure Hunt really does derive from the fact that when Emily and I were in college, we were roommates. We had very little in common except liking National Treasure. So that made us like it even more.
That's
Yeah,
so
and we
funny.
we watched it together in college, so it
Right.
was a great experience.
It's interesting because we show the movie here at the National Archives from time to time. We showed it right before the 4th of July weekend. And I went down to our auditorium, expecting 4th of July, a lot of people out and about Washington, D.C., maybe not wanting to come in to watch a movie. So I expected to have a small group of families coming in to watch National Treasure. I walked in to give the introduction and the welcome to everyone, and the auditorium was completely full, and there was no room for anyone else. So, I mean, it's fun to watch kids. It's 20 years old now, but it's fun to watch new generations of kids. Why do you think they find to watch who watch the movie? Why do you think they find such a connection to it?
It's such a big question and something that we've endeavored to dive into on our podcast and in our book. And I think there are a couple of different reasons. One of the beautiful things about this movie, this franchise as a whole, is it is so intergenerational. It was definitely intentionally created as a PG film, something that could speak to and be entertaining to both kids and their parents when their parents are watching it with them. So that intergenerational nature, I think, is a big piece of this. Another piece is the characters. The characters that were created and the actors who portray them, I think, leave a huge mark and a memorable mark for viewers of all ages. I think there's something really special about Ben Gates and nobility, the noble cause that he has in his mind. It's really hard to root against him. Personally, I can't think of a single movie or TV show where a protagonist is so obviously the good guy, you know? Some people might find that to be, one dimensional. I think it's really an admirable trait for a character like Ben. And finally, I always like to point out you mentioned, Dr. Shogan, that we are 20 years after National Treasure's premiere. It's really incredible that this movie has had so much staying power, especially when in really quintessential crucial moments in our nation's history in the past 5-10 years, whenever those moments happen, you see people referencing National Treasure, quotes from the movie, memes and gifs from the movie, because it is speaking to this universal and timeless desire to take stock in your morals and your values and to do something about them when they're being challenged. So I think that has a lot to do with it as well.
Mhm. I would say one of the things, when I travel around the country and talk to and meet people who are interested in the National Archives or interested in history, there are a couple questions that I get sort of, over and over, no matter where I travel. And certainly one of them is, can I steal the Declaration of Independence? So, I mean, it's right from the movie and everybody laughs. And, then I'm able to talk a little bit about it and why no, you can't steal the Declaration of Independence. We can talk about that later. But tell us a little bit, what was the origin of this movie? Why was it written? Why was it made?
Yeah, so story writer Charles Seegers and his friend Oren Aviv were the ones that wrote the story for the film. And Charles was inspired when he went to visit the National Archives, and he was doing some research for a documentary series, but he noticed that there was not a very long line to see the Charters of Freedom. And that made him really sad. He wanted people to go see these amazing documents that are just fundamental to what it means to be an American citizen. And his question kind of became, how can we inspire people to go see the Charters of Freedom? He also really liked Indiana Jones,
Mhm.
as it happens, and
Yeah.
he wanted another Raiders of the Lost Ark,
Mhm.
but he wanted it to have a bit of a more kind of historical and moral basis behind it. And so he took those two concepts and put them together to give us National Treasure.
Amazing. That's terrific. I can tell you these days, most days when you come to the National Archives, there is, a line to see the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. And there's never really a moment that I walk into the rotunda and I don't see, many, many Americans gathered around looking at the documents and examining them. And part of the reason for that is really spreading the word of the National Archives, and it's been done a lot through the movie, which is quite helpful, not just to 20 years ago, but continuing in further generations who watch the movie and enjoy it.
We really like to say that they definitely succeeded in their goal,
Mhm.
and it's one of the reasons why they were very adamant about when they filmed these movies, whenever they could film within or outside of the actual locations that they were purporting to show on screen. They wanted to do that to give people the experience of visiting if they couldn't make it, but also to inspire them to pay a visit themselves.
Right. So in the early 2000s, before, well before I became Archivist of the United States, there was, a new technologies were used for the re-encasement of the Charters of Freedom, for the Declaration, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. So what role did these new technologies to protect these founding documents, what role did that play in the movie and how were they reinterpreted?
I'm so glad you asked this question because one of my big pet peeves when interacting with audiences about this franchise is when people are like, oh, the Declaration stealing heist, that's so ridiculous. They make it look so easy, or, something like that. And what people don't realize is that the creators of this franchise are not naive people. They know that they're asking their protagonist to do something pretty out there, pretty outlandish. So they took it upon themselves to make sure that everything they asked the characters to do, they made it as realistic as they possibly could within these kind of outlandish parameters. So keep that in mind. And now I need to take you back to the 1990s because a lot of people also don't realize that the 1990s is the origins of National Treasure.
Mhm.
The movie took a very, very long time to write and to come to fruition. So different iterations of this movie, heists, scenes, etc., were being written and tossed out and written and tossed out. And so, by the time this massive re-encasement and protection process, I guess re-upping the protection process for the declaration was happening, there was already a version of the script with a heist involved. And as soon as this process with the re-encasement happened, the creators took to heart that initial intention to make sure that this seemed, as I like to say, as possible, right?
Mhm.
And so they learned whatever publicly available information they could about the new system. They hired a breaking and entering expert, a retired law enforcement official, to be a consultant in devising the script. And they planned their heist accordingly. So the heist looks entirely different today because of that newer protection system for the Declaration.
Mhm. Great. I can tell you, I do want to be honest that you can't steal the Declaration of Independence the way that Ben Gates is able to steal it in the movie. People, like I said, people ask me this all the time, but it is super. It is protected really so many different layers of protection. I can't go into any details because of how protected it is to even know how we are able to take care to make sure that nothing bad happens to any of the documents. So it couldn't happen the way that it did happen, although it was a very nice reenactment and tale that is fun to watch and enjoy as it goes along. So another part of the movie that I like, there's several examples in National Treasure of ciphers or secret codes that play a role in, of course, the treasure hunt in National Treasure. We have a lot, letters from our founding fathers that include the mention and use of ciphers. So how historically accurate are the ciphers in the movie?
I mean, you're speaking my language here. I love the ciphers. I love codes. So getting to watch them occur on screen and then find out that ciphers were actually used in history was something that was extremely exciting to me as a small child.
Mhm.
I can confidently say, because Aubrey and I have done the research on this, that the main cipher that's used in the first National Treasure film, which is the Ottendorf cipher, which is found on the back of the Declaration of Independence, is 100% a real cipher. It's a subcategory of a book cipher. And the creators were super intentional with choosing this specific cipher because they actually found that Ottendorf ciphers, as you just said, were used by our founding fathers, and they were actually very commonly used during the Revolutionary War and the time during which the Declaration of Independence would have been being drafted and written and then finally codified and signed. And so the idea that there could be a code on the back of the Declaration of Independence representative of an Ottendorf cipher is 100% plausible within the context of the history of the code.
Right,
I
and
like
the
to make
history of
that
the
clear.
document, right.
Yes,
But I want
yes.
to repeat this again, as much as, once again, I love the movie. There is not a cipher on the back of the Declaration of Independence. There is writing. It says Original Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776. But unfortunately, there's not a cipher that has at least been discovered up until this point.
You sound quite a bit like Abigail Chase when when sharing that.
True.
Absolutely.
It's true, actually. That's great. That's a good reference to Abigail, who does. I did say up until this point, who knows? We never say never. So, talk to us a little bit about the filming of National Treasure and the filming on, you mentioned this before about some of the different places that National Treasure goes as they move along in the hunt. Why did they decide to build the rotunda or recreate the rotunda as a set versus on site? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, whenever they could film on site, they absolutely did. And unfortunately, the big notable exception to that is the National Archives. Now, I do like to point out that the exterior scenes for the archives were filmed in DC outside of the building. One of my favorite scenelets where Abigail, after the gala, is marching across the road with the Capitol in the background. They really did shut down, what is that, Constitution Avenue,
Mhm.
for that scene. But the interior scenes, you're exactly right. Those were filmed on a set. I will say though, a pretty high fidelity replica, if you ask a non-expert like myself. The only, if you're really looking for the differences, I feel like the main differences are in the murals overlooking the rotunda. The coloration is a little bit different in the movie compared to the real thing. And so the reason they chose to use the set was multifold. But I always like to point out that most people assume, it was because of the Declaration and the charters exclusively that they didn't want to film in the rotunda. From our understanding, it goes a little bit beyond that, and it actually is the murals that were a big piece of why they chose not to film in the rotunda. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what film production looks like, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of equipment, and there's a lot of lights. And those lights are hot, and those aren't very good for preserving artwork and documentation. Now, of course, our charters are super well protected, which I'm sure you could share even more, Dr. Shogan, in terms of the encasements that we see every day. But those murals don't have that same kind of encasement and protection. So they opted to build this set. Like I said, the rotunda looks very true to form. To me, the big giveaway is when they get to the gift shop in the movie, and it's very much not the gift shop at the actual archives.
Although we sell the Declaration of Independence for anybody who would like to buy it
Mhm.
in the tube. So that is absolutely 100% realistic.
For sure. Now, I do like to point out, though, that most of the other locations that you're seeing in the film are the real locations. For our audience here that either live in or around Washington, D.C., or are fans of D.C., because you're tuning in here, the Library of Congress features prominently in both the first movie and the second movie, National Treasure 2 Book of Secrets. And they actually did film inside of the Library of Congress for both movies. For the second movie, it was actually quite the production. It filming took place over 2 whole weekends in the spring. They basically had to film from like 6 p.m. to
Yes.
6 a.m. every day because they can't mess with typical operations, and there are a lot of people and a lot of noise involved.
There was, and I remember that. I was actually working at the Library of Congress when the second film was
No
being
way.
done, and I remember what a big deal it was because there were things that were blocked out in front of the Jefferson Building, and there was rumors of Nick Cage is here. They're doing National Treasure 2. It's going to play a big role with the Library of Congress, so it was very exciting when that happened.
What cool timing! Oh my
It was.
goodness.
Mhm.
Might I ask you? You mentioned the misconceptions around people thinking you can actually steal the Declaration, that there might be something written on the back. Are there other questions that you get a lot about the movie that we probably have never thought of before?
I think the big one is some sort of joke about stealing the Declaration of Independence. I'm trying to think if if I get other questions there. I'll try to not really that comes to mind. Usually people reference it. A lot of people say that they saw the movie and it's what they got excited or interested in it. A lot of times we hear from parents and they saw the movie and now they're sharing the movie with their kids, which is a lot of fun.
I love that. That's so cool to hear.
Mhm. So, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that the public has from the film?
Oh wow. I mean, we could go on and on. But we will not spend all the time doing that. Um, Honestly, I think the biggest misconception is that it is 100% fictional and not at all based in anything that happened in history.
Mhm.
And from speaking with the story writers as well as the producers on the film, we know that there was a very strong intention to incorporate history wherever possible. Basically, what the creators of National Treasure did is they took pieces of history that had kind of a bit of a question mark on
Mhm.
them, or a little bit of a gap, and they filled that in with something that could be realistic if you tried hard enough. The film gets compared to something like the Da Vinci Code a lot, and I am a big fan of the Da Vinci Code in general, but that movie is not based in history in the same way
Mhm.
that the National Treasure films are. And I think that, I don't know, that's something that Aubrey and I have discussions about a lot, is really, how do we make sure that people understand that this movie is educational, right? The stuff that you're seeing in the movie and learning about is quite often about things that directly happened in
I
our nation's history.
I always like to point out at least two examples of, for instance, the beginning of National Treasure. We meet present day Ben Gates, Nicolas Cage, in the Arctic Circle, and he is finding the Charlotte ship. The Charlotte really was a merchant ship that was lost at sea in the time period in which they state it was. It was lost in the Canadian Arctic, Newfoundland area, and to this day remains lost. And so that's what Emily's saying when you have this question mark, what happened to the ship? Well, Ben Gates could have found it because it was lost. So you can kind of put that spin. Another example I like to give is in the second movie, they tell a really elaborate story about the HMS Resolute and the crafting of the Resolute desks. So in that movie, we see our characters go visit the Resolute desk at Buckingham Palace, and then, of course, the Resolute desk in the White House Oval Office. And the story they tell about the ship, the HMS Resolute, and how it was fashioned into these desks was 100% accurate. The only detail they get wrong, and this is entirely for plot purposes, is that the folks making those desks, they made 3 desks, not 2. And so I think that's a pretty minor detail in an otherwise pretty flawlessly told story. So I actually, i- another pet peeve of mine is when people are like, oh, this is just all complete and utter nonsense. It's like, it spins on history. It's not completely fabricated.
And there's details in that movie about Mount Vernon that are absolutely true. There,
100%.
there George Washington did have, a wine cellar. I think Nick Gates gets kind of doesn't he get kind of stuck in the wine cellar? I'm trying to remember with the president. I forget on the second movie. So, I mean, if you go to Mount Vernon and you do special tours, you can actually see that area. So there's a lot of truth about some of these sites. And the most important thing is if we can engage anybody who watches the movie, but particularly young people, and they watch it and they get excited about learning more about American history, then the film has really served its purpose, I think.
Yeah.
Oh,
They-
100%. And Aubrey and I have had the absolute honor of speaking to many fans of the franchise, and we've learned that a lot of people who saw these films when they were younger have now chosen career paths that align very strongly with what characters in the movies are doing. We had a discussion with someone recently who's going to be an archivist
Mhm.
because she saw Abigail Chase being an archivist, and
Right.
that sparked that interest. And like, that's fantastic.
So you chronicled this movie better than anybody else. So can you tell us a few behind the scenes fun facts or stories that we wouldn't necessarily know from just watching the film?
This is my favorite part of the National Treasure Hunt project because anytime we get to talk to someone who is part of the creative team or part of the
Mhm.
cast and learn a new secret, it's just the excitement doesn't get old, I will say. One of the best crowd pleasing fun facts that we've learned in the past is that, contrary to popular belief, when the story writers were first envisioning this film, they didn't actually have Nicolas Cage in mind for the role of Ben Gates.
Hmm.
When they were first developing the initial story, they actually had Will Smith in mind to
Oh,
play.
okay.
Yeah, to play the lead role. In their visualization, his father, Patrick, would have been played by Morgan Freeman.
Okay.
Once we tell people the Will Smith thing, they always guess Morgan Freeman for the dad, like
Right, right. Mhm.
invariably. So that was something they had in mind. But again, this went through so many iterations of scripts and so many different screenwriters. So eventually it does land on Nick Cage, but they had a hard time casting that lead role. And so
Mm.
at one point, Disney even offered the role to Julia Roberts.
Really, a female, so it would have
Yeah.
been female Ben Gates.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Mm.
And so you can imagine how every time they even notionally attach a new person to the lead role, they kind of have to rewrite the script because they need to start writing it into that person's voice to make sure that person can even see themselves in that role. We're under the impression that getting it to Nick Cage's voice was the biggest challenge of all.
Mm.
But you have some fun facts about locations too, right?
I do. So yeah, we've done a lot of, talking here about how filming at locations was very intentional from the producers of the film. And one of the historic locations that's featured is Independence Hall.
Right.
And online on these kind of like fact or fiction boards, a lot of people um, purport that the scenes that were filmed at Independence Hall were actually filmed entirely at Knott's Berry Farm, which has a replica of Independence Hall. And so Aubrey and I always believed this, and we did a little bit of digging, and we found out that the only scenes that were filmed in Knott's Berry Farm were some of the interior
Mhm.
scenes. The scene where Ben Gates or Nick Cage is walking across the roof of Independence Hall was filmed at Independence Hall.
Yeah, I went to Independence Hall when I was in Philadelphia for work, and I happened to take a tour of Independence Hall and talk to some of the fantastic park rangers that help lead you through a tour of Independence Hall. And we talked about National Treasure, and they both, told me some stories about it and said that it absolutely happened there. And they get a lot of people that want to go up in the higher floors of Independence Hall, which is not necessarily open on the general tour, and that can sometimes cause a little bit of problems for them.
Yes, that is true. And speaking of those higher levels, we had the honor of speaking to the actor who plays Shaw in the film. His name is David Diane Fisher. And he worked very closely with Sean Bean, who played Ian Howe. And there is a scene where they are in the bell tower area of Independence Hall. And Aubrey and I were shocked to learn this, but I will say we have shared it before. We actually shared it at Independence Hall. So, people know this, but um, David Diane Fisher told us that they were waiting a really long time for, action to be called. And he and Sean Bean decided that it would be fun to kind of lean back against the railing and use their feet to ring the bell that is situated in the bell tower. And obviously, people heard this,
Right.
and their immediate response was, I didn't hear a bell ring.
That's great. So tell us a little bit, have you learned anything about the conservation and preservation of these treasured documents in writing your book?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so our book, National Treasure Hunt One Step Short of Crazy, really attempts to be a scene by scene analysis of both National Treasure films, examining things like history and science and the ethics of character decisions. But one of the things that we definitely wanted to look into was basically, how are documents like the Declaration preserved? What would Ben Gates' actions have done to the Declaration if he actually did this in real life? And any other fun facts in that regard. So, I mean, I know I don't have to tell you, Dr. Shogan, that doing literally anything Ben did with the Declaration would be a
No.
very bad idea.
Would.
um,
Yes, especially rolling it up, I think is pretty much, I mean, getting dropped and going across the street and all these other different things, but rolling it up would be pretty bad.
everything from the potential tearing of this fragile parchment to the flaking off of the already highly disintegrated writing to the addition of residues from lemon juice that could attract pests and cause even more damage. None of that was terribly surprising to us, but important for us to put down on paper to set the record straight. A couple of fun facts behind, document conservation that I found really fascinating when doing this research. um, One piece actually has to do with the drafting of the Declaration itself. So we learned that Thomas Jefferson had one of probably a few personal copies when he was working on the draft. One of his copies is now part of the collections of the Library of Congress, and back in around 2010, the Library of Congress was, I suppose, doing some conservation, some preservation work, some study of this document, and they discovered for the first time, just in like 2010, which feels so recent to me, that an early version of Jefferson's draft referred to all of us as subjects, and it was only later changed to citizens, which itself is I think, a fascinating revelation, a fascinating concept. But then I like to add on the layer that they made this discovery using the same type of imaging technique that our characters use at the very beginning of National Treasure 2 when examining their booth diary page. So there's a fun little crossover event there, but it also speaks to how various scientific techniques, imaging techniques, etc., can be applied to understand and to preserve documents today. The other story that I like to tell, because it also relates to National Treasure's creation, is something that I think most Americans don't know. Back when Mount Rushmore was being constructed, sculptor Gutzon Borglum, who was in charge of the structure, really wanted to create a vault behind the Lincoln head at Mount Rushmore. And in that vault, he proposed to store our charters of freedom. He thought if there was ever like a nuclear catastrophe, major fallout, the most safe place these documents could be stored would be in a vault surrounded by just utter rock, right? So he started creating that vault, but he didn't finish the vault. The idea didn't go anywhere. But back around 1998, there was a ceremonial placement of, I guess, like carved versions, tablets of our charters of freedom that were ceremonially stored in this rudimentary vault. Now, 1998, you might recall that's around the time National Treasure's story is coming together. And so this was a point of interest for creator Charles Seegers as he was generating a story about the Declaration, how to protect it, what it might need protecting from. And so, since it didn't make it into the first movie, we saw Mount Rushmore show up in National Treasure too.
Excellent. Well, I have one more question for you before we go to questions from our viewers. So if you do have questions for our guests about National Treasure, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to as many as possible. My last question is a really important one, and one that, I actually wonder about, and I do get asked this question when I travel around, and this is a question on everyone's mind. Will there be a National Treasure 3? And what are we waiting for here? What's taking so long?
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for asking. It's our favorite question to answer, mostly because we tend to make people really happy with the
Mm,
answer we can give. And
okay.
so the answer to that is we very much expect National Treasure 3 to happen sooner rather than later. It has been so long, and I know people have been fooled before, but thanks to our close friendship with the director John Turteltaub and current screenwriter Ted Elliott, among others, we have it on very good authority that not only is a current script being drafted, but there's a complete draft. It is undergoing revisions, and Disney and everyone involved really wants to make it. That includes the whole principal cast.
I was going to say, would we see everyone back?
We fully anticipate having all of our principal characters come back. I guess barring any crazy scheduling conflicts that they can't seem to overcome, but that's the latest.
And do we have any idea of what sites might be featured in a National Treasure 3?
Well, I mean, we've definitely posited some ideas of our own, but I think the one that's kind of a more basic answer, I guess I would say, is, Washington, D.C. has been featured heavily in both films. And so we, Aubrey and I, as well as many of the fans who we've spoken to, agree that sites in Washington, D.C. need to be part of
Okay.
the third film. It
Doesn't have to
would,
be all set in DC, but it could, but there needs to be a component in Washington, DC.
yeah, I feel like it wouldn't be National Treasure without it
Mhm.
at
Well, I
all.
will tell you that the National Archives is open to hosting National Treasure 3. So I'm putting it out there. We would love to be part of the next plot. If not the feature part of the plot, we would love to be part of it because it would be very exciting to tell another story related to American history that everybody can get behind. It would be tremendous.
We will happily share that with
That's
John
right.
Turteltaub and the team for sure, for sure.
That's
The one other thing I will tease about the third movie that I think is actually quite exciting. If you've been a member of the National Treasure fandom for a long time, you've probably seen people take guesses online, or even at the archives when you're visiting about what the third treasure will be.
mm,
Um, and I think it's really exciting to say that screenwriter Ted Elliott told us exclusively that he's never seen the treasure guest online, on a podcast, in any article. So keep
oh,
the
wow.
guess, yeah, keep the guesses coming.
So it's something else, something that people haven't come up with yet.
Yeah, which is exciting and also wild, right? Like, can you imagine it's been 17 years since the second movie and no one's guessed it? It makes me even more excited.
That's great. That's terrific. Well, so we have viewers today, which a great audience. We have viewers from Texas, from Georgia, Massachusetts, Utah, California, Pennsylvania, and even as far away as New Zealand. So I'm going to get through as many questions as possible. What was the most surprising thing about the movie you learned during doing your research?
Oh boy.
I think it's got to be the like alternative version of the National Treasure 2 script that was in existence. I mean, it still is in existence, but essentially National Treasure 2 was going to be a completely different movie.
Yeah.
And very happy we ended up with the one that we have, though the other one would have been great as well. But I think Aubrey and I were both very surprised to learn that.
Yeah, there were definitely different major differences in that earlier script. But what's even maybe not surprising but impressive to me is how National Treasure 2 came together, given the fact that they were writing pages of script literally the night before they were filming them.
Wow.
On top of that, they don't film in order. So they're like starting near the end of the movie, having to film multiple versions of a given scene because they don't know the final direction that this movie is going to take. It's one of the reasons you can find so many deleted scenes about National Treasure 2 on YouTube. So go check those out. But yeah, I would agree with you, Em.
In the movie, they say that the Declaration is made from animal skin. Is that true?
It seems like the question that's really fit for you, Dr. Shogun. I understand it's parchment, which is based on it's made from animal skin, but I would happily
That's
turn
correct.
that
It
one to
is.
you.
It's not paper. It's parchment, and it is made from animal skin. So that is absolutely true, as what you saw in the movie. Absolutely. And I think the next question is for me. What is the job of the Archivist of the United States? Unfortunately, it's not the same. It's not as quite as exciting as what Abigail gets to do in National Treasure. I'm not, running all around the country and jumping off of trucks, anything like that. But it's a terrific job nonetheless. My job as Archivist of the United States is to run the National Archives. And a little bit about the National Archives is that it is an agency. Yes, we are the agency that houses the Declaration, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights here in Washington, D.C. But the building that we're sitting in right now, where I'm sitting right now in my office, which is really just around the corner from the Declaration of Independence, is only one of 40 locations that we have around the United States. Archival facilities, presidential libraries, federal record centers. We have locations all across the United States in which you can learn about our nation's documents and about our history and our records. So if you are in DC, we invite you to come and visit us, but you may also be able to visit one of our facilities all across, in the South, in the Midwest, in California, in the Pacific Northwest. We have locations all across the United States, and we truly invite you to check us out, to come and learn a little bit about our nation's history, about your own personal history, and your own community's history. And if you look at our website on archives.gov, you can learn more about how you can do that. And my job is to run that agency to enable Americans to have access to all of our nation's records. So the next question is about the Masonic symbolism in the movie. It said the movie explores John Wilkes Booth, the second movie in particular, and the Knights of the Golden Circle, who are known as the Templar. So can you speak a little bit about the Masonic connections that are in the films?
There are so many. There, there are really so many. It's a through line. It's a theme that the creators really did tease through both movies, and also, for the record, the TV show that came out on Disney Plus just a couple of years ago, National Treasure: Edge of History. Of course, we see our introduction to the Masonic symbology, if you will, in the opening scenes of the first National Treasure movie, when young Ben Gates, is interacting with his grandfather, and he's telling the story of the Knights Templar and how the origins of this treasure came to be. Now, the movie does take a little bit of a leap and say that the Freemasons were born directly out of the Knights Templar. While that is actually a common misconception, a common conspiracy theory, if you will, that's not true in real life. However, many sort of fraternal organizations have some of the same values and goals as the Knights Templar did back in, the medieval era. Um, so we see a lot of that symbology early on. Symbols for any good treasure hunt movie, symbols are very important. We see those symbols expand beyond things like the all-seeing eye to physical things like money. American currency is frequently referenced in National Treasure as clues to solve clues, etc. So that's very important. And yeah, I don't know, it's throughout the whole thing. Are there other specific examples we should talk about, do you think?
I mean, I think one that gets overlooked a lot of times is the concept that Agent Sadusky, who is kind of the FBI, the main FBI agent in the films, um is a Freemason. He is wearing one of the rings.
Mhm.
And they make a point to show you that in the film, but it definitely is something that when I watch the movie for the first time with people, they're always like, "Oh, I didn't know that." So that's always a little fun tidbit.
I'm glad you mentioned that. The last thing I'll say about that is we have heard varying perspectives from people who are Freemasons about whether they like the portrayal or they don't like the portrayal in the movie, because I think it shines a spotlight on the organization. My personal opinion is it makes the organization look quite noble. I'm obviously not a Freemason myself. This is just my opinion from the movie. But interestingly, some people think that the organization is portrayed somewhat surreptitiously in a negative light, right? They're hiding this treasure. They are kind of controlling this massive bit of cultural history, and preventing it from getting into the hands of people who it belongs to. There are different ways of interpreting it. Oh, and speaking of, the movie does assert that at least 9 Freemason founding fathers signed the Declaration of Independence, and that is completely true.
Yes. And I mean, there's a lot of Masonic traditions, including, Masonic tradition dictates, setting a cornerstone when you're building a new building. And we know, of course, that George Washington never lived in the White House, but he did place the cornerstone of the White House when, as ground broke for the construction of the White House. Now, the mystery on that is connected. Washington being a Mason, that was a Masonic practice. Fast forward into the late 1940s, and Harry Truman, another Mason, is president of the United States, and they have to undergo a huge renovation of the White House because the White House has some structural problems and it's going to fall down. So Harry Truman enables a major renovation of the White House, but he says, as a Mason, find me the cornerstone at the White House that George Washington laid. And they gutted the complete White House, searched for it as part of the renovation of the White House. And that cornerstone is still lost to history. It has never been found, which is a great Masonic mystery to think about. Maybe that could be the new national treasure,
I
the
was
mystery
gonna
White
say.
House cornerstone. There's a lot of theories about what happened to that cornerstone and what might be contained in the cornerstone. So look it up. It's a lot of fun.
Brilliant. Love it.
The next question, is there really a book of secrets? And have you asked the Librarian of Congress about it?
Yeah, so every time we visit the Library of Congress, we do make a point to ask. The staff is probably a little tired of hearing it from us, but there is not a book of secrets in the way that it is portrayed in National Treasure 2 Book of Secrets. There are many books in the Library of Congress that are titled Book of Secrets or have Book of Secrets in the title. But there is no actual Book of Secrets that exists.
Yeah.
Now, what the Librarian of Congress always would say is there is no book of secrets as portrayed in National Treasure. But if you come and do research at the Library of Congress, you will find many books that contain secrets. Then that's the whole idea. So then you can tell the story of those secrets. And by
I
the way,
love
the
that.
Library of Congress, they also did a special display where they borrowed the Book of Secrets, the prop from the movie, and actually let people come and see it, which was very popular, as I recall, when that went on display.
Yeah, it's we had a chance to speak with the prop designer who designed the Book of Secrets for the movie. His name's Ross McDonald. He's fantastic. And I remember him telling us that when he heard that it was going on display, he was very excited. And then he learned that what random page, I guess, that it was flipped to. And he was like, that was literally the one page I put zero effort into. And just randomly, that is the page that gets flipped to for this display. But we wish we could have seen that display book. That sounds amazing.
Last question here before we wrap up. How many times have you seen National Treasure? And when you watch it, are there things that you haven't noticed before?
100%. I mean,
Wow.
Aubrey, you and I we had a ton of events this past summer where we watched National Treasure in celebration of the 20th anniversary, and every single screening that we were at together, we had a moment where each of us looked at each other and went, "Oh, I never noticed that before."
Hmm.
So there's literally always more layers to figure out.
I mean, we've on our podcast we've done deep dives into individual scenes or scenelets. Where just this past season on our podcast, we had one episode, for example, where we freeze framed every frame of the Ben Gates apartment scene to
Oh,
see what he has in his apartment and how it connects to the story. And some of the things that you don't realize, like for example, the ladder, step stool turned ladder that you see in the very beginning of the movie when he's a child, which was actually an invention of Ben Franklin. That's another Easter egg, for example. Everything is intentional in this movie. That step stool is in his apartment. There's a lot of references to the Charlotte in his apartment, things like that. But it's funny, Em, we really need to get a better answer to the question of how many times we've seen National Treasure. We get asked this all the time, and we it's easily thousands at this point, right? We've lost count for sure.
mhm. Amazing. That's terrific. Well, that was our last question. I want to thank Emily and Aubrey for joining us tonight. And I want to thank all of our viewers who have tuned in live to watch our inaugural episode. I hope you will join us for our next episode of Inside the Vault, which will be on November 18th. We will be joined by author and historian Donald Miller to discuss his book, Masters of the Air. He will be joined by executive producer Kirk Sadusky, who turned the book into a recent hit TV show in the Band of Brothers series. That'll be a fascinating conversation, and we'll see you there. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look to see you next month.